the Big Bud Shootout, featuring a showdown between 8 of the finest fiberglass-bodied funny cars, driven by 8 of the best drivers in the world that thread the needle through the quarter-mile racetrack at speeds topping 250 miles an hour, with elapsed times of less than 6 seconds. Hello, everybody. I'm Dave McClelland, and I'm located in what might be called the heart of any drag strip, the Race Control Center, or Tower. And this one here at Indianapolis Raceway Park is getting ready to supervise an exciting new program developed by the National Hot Rod Association, the Big Bud Shootout. This is an all-out, go-for-it race between 8 of the fastest funny cars in the world, and each of the drivers will be trying to have his name placed on that check for $25,000 that goes to the winner. To find out how these 8 got here today, let's join a man that knows almost everything about championship drag racing, Steve Evans.
Thank you, Dave. The 8 drivers that have attracted this huge crowd here today have been competing for this privilege all season long. At the past 9 NHRA National Championship events, a careful record has been kept as to how all funny cars qualified. At the end of qualifying, the drivers received points depending on how they performed. For example, in a 16-car field, the low ET, number 1 qualifier, received 175 points. The slowest car in the field, number 16, received 85 points. After the recent North Star Nationals, the points were tallied, and the top 8 drivers were rewarded with a chance to make $25,000 for a single afternoon's work. Well, so much about how the drivers got here. Now let's learn more about the machines they'll be competing in today. And to handle that chore, a fellow who knows, well, maybe even a little bit more than I do about this sport. He's a 2-time funny car national champion, Kenny Bernstein.
Thank you, Steve, and you're absolutely correct. These are outstanding race cars. They are certainly very much crowd pleasers, as they are very pretty, they're wild, they go fast and make noise. One of the reasons many of us enjoy driving them is because they go so fast, many times 250 miles an hour in the quarter mile. And they get there with this baby, a 2,000 horsepower nitro-burning fuel motor that with the right chassis, clutch, and fuel mixture can give you the thrill of your life in 5 seconds. So this is the funny car, a complex and sophisticated machine, and you're going to see 8 of the best in the world today. It's simply going to be phenomenal. Dave?
Thank you, Kenny, and here's where they'll be racing. Indianapolis Raceway Park. Using the standard NHRA Eliminator ladder for an 8-car field, let's take a look at the pairings. The number 4 qualifier, Tommy Anderson, goes off against number 8, Dale Baldy. The number 3 qualifier, Frank Hawley, against number 7, Al Segrini. Number 2, that's Raymond Beadle in the Blue Max against Don Prudhomme, number 6. And the number 1 qualifier, Billy Meyer, against Gary Bergen, number 5. Ready for racing in the first round of the Big Bud Shootout at Indianapolis Raceway Park. We've got 8 of the finest 250-mile-an-hour funny cars in the world. In the near lane, Tommy Anderson doing his burnout. He'll be racing against Dale Baldy in round number 1 of this 8-car field.
Dale Pulte from Van Nuys, California, grew up in the streets racing cars, but now he's driving the War Eagle and will certainly be a favorite today. Tom Anderson from Macadon, New York, is excellent on the starting line, has super reactions.
Here's Tommy Anderson. He's completing his burnout, and he's continuing to roll down the racetrack. Looks like he's out of competition. Kenny, what's the matter?
Dave, I'm not sure, not being down there, but it's obvious the engine is still running, but he's not stopping. He probably has got a brake problem.
What a disappointment for Tommy Anderson. He's out of competition. Dale Pulte with an easy single in the first round of the Big Bud Shootout. Here's our next pair of cars. In the far lane, it's Al Segrini, while here in the near lane, it is Frank Hawley.
Frank Hawley reflects on the star-studded funny car fields in which he competed early in his career.
Back in the early 80s, the funny car fields were absolutely tremendous. They're great now, but what we had back then was what I would call all the career drivers. They were lifers. We had the Kenny Bernsteins and the Raymond Beadles, the Billy Meyers, and to be in a field like that with those names was absolutely exhilarating, because I was a young guy, came out of Canada, drove alcohol cars, got a chance to drive the Chi-Town Hustler. It was really exciting, and I just couldn't wait to get out on the racetrack and see if we could compete against these guys.
This could be a close race. Steve had a chance to ask Frank Hawley about the two cars.
We've raced Al in 2 final rounds at the national events, and we beat him twice. They've both been pretty close races. At this race, he's run a 91 and a 92. We've run an 88 and a 93. That sounds about an even draw to me. I'm just going to have to be sharp on the starting line.
And that's where so many races are won, right here on the starting line of this quarter-mile racing surface. Both cars starting from a standing start, covering 1,320 feet. In the far lane, Al Segrini, Frank Hawley. He is confident, but he knows he's up against a tough competitor in Segrini. Starting line like rockets. Frank Hawley has a bit of a lead early in the race, and at the finish line by a car length, Frank Hawley wins it, an outstanding 5.89 second elapsed time. And I think Al Segrini really hurt an engine on this run. Here you see Frank Hawley with about a car length lead at that point, and that's all he gets through the quarter mile, as Al Segrini right with him, but at the finish line, Al Segrini just fries an engine.
Climbing out of the car, getting his helmet off, the winner of the first ever side-by-side 5-second funny car race, and one step closer to $25,000, Frank Hawley.
Thank you very much. Boy, I saw him for a little bit, and then drove around him, and it seemed about 300-400 feet, and I never saw him after that.
He appeared to have a slight edge off the line.
He has every time we've raced him, so that's nothing new.
All right, you'll get ready for the second round. Who do you want to race there?
I don't even know who we race. I have this superstition about worrying who we run, and all I was worried about right then was Al, and I'm sure NHRA or someone knows who we're supposed to race, and we'll be there.
Okay, Frank Hawley, one step closer to the big payoff.
Thank you, Steve. Frank moving away from the... Oh, he's going over to shake hands with Al Segrini. Well, I'll tell you, whatever Al Segrini and Bill Schultz tried, it didn't work. Our next two funny car drivers have a total of 7 world championships between them. In the near lane, Raymond Beadle with 3, and in the far lane, Don Prudhomme has 4.
Don Prudhomme from Granada Hills, California is the winningest funny car driver in the history of racing. And from my home state of Texas, Raymond Beadle and the fabulous Blue Max. And boy, I hope he has Texas power.
Well, Kenny, the two of them represent one of the longest-standing rivalries in the history of the sport. Steve talked to both of them.
You know, Snake's always our toughest competitor day in and day out. I mean, sometimes we're really hot like we've been early in the year. Later on in the year, we've fallen off a little bit with our low qualifying. He's come on strong here lately, so, I mean, everything comes in cycles. You're not always up and you're not always down.
To tell you the truth, we're going to try and take it easy as we can. We don't know how we're really set for this race. We're just a little bit of a loss right now. The car's running terribly good, but also it's using up parts. We have another good motor in it. We've changed some things on it. If it lives, it'll run the distance.
Of course, that's the thought on both racers' minds at the moment. If it lives, if the parts breakage problem does not enter into it, this can be a great race. And Don Prudhomme just streaks away from Raymond Beadle off the starting line. And at the finish, there's some smoke out of the headers. He may have heard it 5.97 seconds. His speed only 203 miles an hour. Our next pair of cars already started. It's Gary Bergen against the #1 qualifier, Billy Meyer from Waco, Texas. Steve is in the turnaround area and is caught up with Don Prudhomme. Let's find out his reaction to what may have been a costly run.
Don Prudhomme removing the special breather helmet. He has survived round 1 here of this $25,000 war. Snake, a little smoke in the lights, but still a 5-second elapsed time.
That's right. I think the rods are still in it. That's the main thing. We can fix the rest.
All right, pistons are easy. It's when you start breaking the bottom end, right?
Yeah, no problem. I think it'll run a lot better next round.
Okay, Beadle always tough.
Yeah, sure he's tough, but, in this Bud Shootout, anybody that's in it's tough. And, of course, Raymond's a good racer.
Did you soften it up a little bit, take some horsepower out?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we've been just destroying parts. We just backed it up and figured that 80 or 90 would do it, and we better put a little more in it now.
You bet.
The 90 that Don Prudhomme refers to is the 5.97 elapsed time that it took him to defeat Raymond Beadle, the Blue Max. Our final pair of cars in the first round of competition, #1 qualifier, Billy Meyer, against this car, Gary Bergen.
Gary Bergen from Stanton, California, can be considered the underdog in this race, but usually plays a role as a spoiler. Billy Meyer, yet another Texan, drives a super fast 250-mile-an-hour rocket.
A tremendous challenge by Gary Bergen as he pulls the lead over Billy Meyer. And Gary Bergen, the upset winner over the #1 qualifier, Billy Meyer. That big win earns him a semifinal berth against Frank Hawley, while Don Prudhomme will be racing Dale Baldy. And it is Hawley against Bergen, and it is as close as you can imagine. But look at Hawley pull it out at the finish line. His elapsed time only 6 seconds flat. Maybe something went wrong with Bergen's car. Let's watch again as they near the timing traps at the end of the strip. And it is Bergen with the lead, but there you see the puff of smoke indicating maybe something went wrong.
All right, now, 6 flat, that's probably not going to win this. You're already on the payroll, but there's a big discrepancy between 25,000 and 5,000 runner-up.
Yeah, well, the race isn't over yet. Did we get runner-up? We still got a chance at winning this deal.
Oh, I know you do.
Yeah, and, you know, the 6 flat, you know, a lot of things can happen between now and the final. Good race.
All right, Gary Bergen over here to talk to Ollie. Gary, just a moment if I could. A very good race. Frank didn't even know he won.
Yeah, it blew the clutch out of it. About 1,000 foot, it just died.
Just died right there on you. So Gary Bergen, very, very disappointed because going out this round, he did not get on the payroll as Hawley will.
Mechanical problems putting Bergen on the trailer for the day. 2 cars remain in the Big Bud Shootout semifinal round. It is Dale Baldy in the far lane, Don Prudhomme in the near lane. The winner of this race will earn the right to go against Frank Hawley in the final, aiming for that $25,000 payoff. A lot of work goes on these cars between rounds of racing. And back in Dale Baldy's pit before this race, you see the motor being disassembled. Steve was there watching the action.
Dale Baldy, you got a second? Motor okay?
No, it's a little worse for wear. When it left the starting line, it shook real hard, and it broke a fuel line nozzle off in the engine and burned it to the ground.
Well, it's a good thing you got a gift round one.
Yeah, because he would have blown me away.
There's a guy across the way over here, some people call him the Snake. He says you better step on this.
Yeah, I don't think there's enough room to step on it if he runs one of those 563s on me.
The 563 referred to by Dale Baldy is the elapsed time recorded yesterday by Don Prudhomme. That is the quickest elapsed time in the history of drag racing for one of these fiberglass-bodied funny cars. In the far lane, Dale Baldy. In the near lane, Don Prudhomme. And boy, Prudhomme is glued to the ground. Baldy having problems, but Prudhomme, look at the elapsed time, 5.82 seconds. He'll have lane choice going into the final of the Big Bud Shootout against Frank Hawley. Remember, the winner takes home $25,000 in cash. Back in Indianapolis Raceway Park, I'm Dave McClelland along with Kenny Bernstein and Steve Evans, and we're set for the final showdown in the Big Bud Shootout. The rising superstar in funny car racing, Frank Hawley, driving the Chi-Town Hustler against the crafty, cagey veteran, Don the Snake Prudhomme, the 4-time world champion. Frank Hawley against Prudhomme in the Big Bud Shootout. Frank Hawley building a lead right off the starting line, and he holds on to it. Frank Hawley wins $25,000 and elapsed time of 5.85 seconds.
We can hear the crowd screaming, and soon we're going to see what a $25,000 smile looks like on the face of Frank Hawley of London, Ontario, Canada, driving the Midwest favorite funny car, the Chi-Town Hustler, and there it is. Congratulations.
Thank you, Steve.
What a car race. You outran the Snake, an 85 to a 92.
We thought we could do it. I mean, it slowed down the last round because we had to change ahead. We put it back and said, well, we'll let it burn this time.
How's it feel to be part of the richest ever side-by-side drag race?
Outstanding.
Diamond P Sports presents championship drag racing from the National Hot Rod Association. The Big Bud Shootout, featuring a showdown between 8 of the finest fiberglass-bodied funny cars, driven by 8 of the best drivers in the world that thread the needle through the quarter-mile racetrack at speeds topping 250 miles an hour, with elapsed times of less than 6 seconds. The Big Bud Shootout. Hello, everybody. I'm Dave McClelland. We're at Indianapolis Raceway Park, and we're right in Race Control Central getting ready for the running of the Big Bud Shootout. A $25,000 top prize has been posted, and we have the 8 best funny cars in the world. Throughout this entire season, all of the funny cars at NHRA national events have been competing for qualifying points to earn the right to race today in the Big Bud Shootout. The funny car is a 2,500 horsepower fiberglass-bodied crowd pleaser. To learn more about it, let's go to Steve Evans.
The funny car was born the day the first racer figured out that if he moved the rear axle closer to the front axle, shortening the wheelbase, he'd get better traction. It worked, too. But the fans in the stand said, boy, those are funny cars. And they did funny things, too, like pick up the front wheels every time they left the starting line. Along came bigger engines, superchargers, fuel injection. As the cars went faster, the crowds got bigger. Then Detroit, always quick to discover a good thing, said, let's put some of our bodies on these machines. Maybe it'll help sell cars. The racers said, nah, they're too heavy. Make them out of fiberglass, and we'll use them. The National Hot Rod Association, befitting the other eliminator categories, decided to call it experimental stock. But the fans wanted funny cars. And David, its funny cars will all get today in the Big Bud Shootout.
And we've got the best in the country all season long. These drivers have been qualifying at a 16-car field. The number 1 qualifier would earn 175 points, while the number 16 qualifier would earn 85. These points were totaled, and these are the drivers in the Big Bud Shootout. Mark Oswald, number 1. Number 7 and 8, Kenny Bernstein and Al Segrini, they just barely made it, just earning the right a couple of weeks ago at the recent North Star National. And here is Al Segrini, the engine getting started for the first race of the day in the Big Bud Shootout. These fiberglass funny cars, utilizing a replica body of a late model American car with 2,500 horsepower engines powered by a blend of nitromethane and alcohol, supercharged and fuel injected. And you see Al Segrini tight inside that tubular roll cage, and the wheelie bars on the back of the car designed to keep the front wheels on the ground as they leave the starting line. Don Prudhomme, one of the most famous racers of all time, against Segrini here in this first round race of the Big Bud Shootout. Segrini qualified 8th in this program, just barely making the field, as we told you a few short weeks ago, while Don Prudhomme, with 1,105 points, qualified in the number 4 position. The burnout procedure designed to heat those huge tires, the rubber actually working better the hotter it becomes. Al Segrini has got to be considered the underdog based on qualifying points, and earlier Steve Evans had a chance to visit with Segrini.
In the background, I can hear Don Prudhomme. He has restarted his car. What's going on over there, do you think?
Well, I mean, Don, you know, he's a perfectionist and he's a true competitor, and he's over there and he doesn't like the way it sounds. I'm hoping he'll fool it a little more and maybe dial that 585 away.
A lot of people are picking you over the Snake.
Well, I hope so. Well, you know, we've been consistent. Snake's run a 599, and he ran that 585. Both of our runs have been right there. We run 250, so we'll be there.
We went over to Don Prudhomme's pit area to watch the conclusion of that second warm-up. Steve then chatted with the man they call the Snake.
Don, you warmed the car up a couple of times this morning. Everything okay?
Yeah, it seems to be. You know, it's a new day, and we're just adjusting for the air and trying to get enough temperature in it and see if it takes the throttle right, and so far it seems all right.
You've got a performance advantage on paper anyway in time trials over Segrini.
Yeah, just the main thing we're battling here is consistency. You know, the car needs to run consistent and keep repeating itself. Segrini's run more quick relapse times than we have consistently, and that's what we're going to be battling. We hope that we can keep on into the 580 bracket to win the event.
On the starting line for the first race in the first round of the Big Bud Shootout, $25,000 top prize at stake. Don Prudhomme in the far lane, Al Segrini in the near lane, and Segrini with a big advantage off the starting line, and at the finish line he extends it. Al Segrini wins the race, and Don Prudhomme's crew very, very disappointed. 5.93 the elapsed time. His speed 244 miles an hour as we watch again. Al Segrini took advantage of Don Prudhomme from the moment the crystal Christmas tree went green. Segrini moving ahead at the very start of the race, and from that point on, there was no catching the Easton, Massachusetts flash as Al Segrini headed to the end of the quarter mile with a definite advantage over Don Prudhomme. So there you have your first winner in the first round of the Big Bud Shootout. It is Al Segrini.
Well, Al Segrini left first and led Don Prudhomme wire to wire with a 5:93, Al.
Oh, great. I'm telling you, well, I tell you, we just want to be consistent and just keep running. Run 93 yesterday. Repeat. I'm very happy the car didn't shake. It ran really good.
You must hold your breath hoping those tires don't smoke when you don't have lane choice like that.
Yeah, well, it spun them on the dry, but it was awesome. Like, you know, that's the way I like it. It had a lot of power, but it spun them, and Craig indicated that it was spreading them a little bit. So I took a little long and got a little more heat in it. Hopefully it would, you know, it hold this time. It held.
So that dry burnout is kind of a preview for you.
Yeah, well, it tells the driver if it'll take all the power, how to, you know, apply the throttle, whether they really stand on it or just kind of, you know, drive it to the store.
Good luck round 2.
Thank you.
Al referring to Craig Berry, one of his crewmen. The Big Bud Shootout is being brought to you by Budweiser, the king of beers and proud sponsor of the U.S. Olympic team. For all you do, this Bud's for you. Kenny Bernstein takes on world champion Frank Hawley next on the Big Bud Shootout. The Big Bud Shootout, the 8 best funny cars in the world taking dead aim on that $25,000 top prize. The defending champion, Frank Hawley in the Chi-Town Hustler, the engine coming to life. While we were away, there was some confusion over who was going to run in this near lane. The number 3 qualifier, Hawley, has the lane choice. He selected the near lane, leaving his competition, Kenny Bernstein, the number 7 qualifier, in the far lane. Actually, this race is a rematch of the finals of the North Star Nationals just a couple of weeks ago when Frank Hawley, who is the defending Big Bud Shootout champion, met Kenny Bernstein at Brainerd, Minnesota for all the honors at the North Star Nationals. Bernstein qualified 7th, just made it at the North Star Nationals in qualifying, while Frank Hawley, the reigning world champion, easily qualified in the number 3 spot. But at the North Star Nationals, in that finals just 2 short weeks ago, Kenny Bernstein in the near lane against Frank Hawley in the Chi-Town Hustler in the far lane. A green light on both lanes, and Kenny Bernstein, by a few feet, takes home the win. Steve had a chance to talk to Frank Hawley about that loss.
The last time we saw this man, Kenny Bernstein, was in the final round of the North Star Nationals. He was a car length ahead of this man, the world champion, the defending Big Bud champion, Frank Hawley. You going to let him do that to you again?
Well, I didn't think we were going to let him do that to us at the North Star Nationals, but it just turned out like that. We left the starting line. I left a little bit first. Gosh, halfway down, I saw a red car, and it just stayed like that for the whole race. So we're not really vengeful, but we don't plan on that happening again.
This is an entirely new race day in the near lane. It is the Chi-Town Hustler with Frank Hawley, the defending champion in the Big Bud Shootout. Kenny Bernstein in the far lane, and what a drag race. And just at the finish line, Kenny Bernstein pulls it out. Look at the times. 5.90 at over 251 miles an hour. One of the fastest times ever by a funny car. As both cars leave the starting line together, you see the front wheels just dancing off the pavement. Those huge rear slicks grabbing the asphalt for traction. Look at the lead by Frank Hawley just off the starting line. But at the middle of the track, here comes Bernstein in his move. He is moving towards the finish line, pulling ahead, and there, just by a few feet, Kenny Bernstein defeats the defending champion in an upset.
Kenny Bernstein comes from behind at a sensational 251 miles an hour. The cap is blown off the magneto. The blower belt is gone. Kenny Bernstein had the hammer down, pushing the throttle through the bell housing to get around Frank Hawley. And I'm not even sure if he knows he won. You did. An absolute repeat of the last time these two fellas met, the North Star Nationals in Brainerd, Minnesota. He was out on you a little bit, and from behind, you came like a rocket.
Yeah, he did. He left on me a little. He got me, and then it just started hauling. I kept watching him, and then he started to disappear, and then all of a sudden she exploded. The blower belt came off, and boom, and I didn't know if I won because right then was when I thought I got around him.
251, the fastest you've ever been.
Fastest we've ever been. That's it. Good. It's nice, but we got some damage. I'm a little worried now.
Kenny Bernstein, the man that just barely made the field, puts the defense defending champion out in round number 1. The favorite in this race is in the near lane. That's Ken Veeney. He is matched against John Force. Veeney from Wadsworth, Ohio, qualified second, 1,195 points to John Force from California. He's the number 6 qualifier, 950 points. Both cars capable of running over 250 miles an hour. All eyes on the starting line in the Christmas tree, and a great start, but John Force with a big lead. He is continuing to extend it, and John Force easily wins another upset as the number 2 qualifier goes out. Force wins it at 5.87 seconds at 247 miles an hour. You know upset has to be on the mind of this lady. Her husband, Mark Oswald, is the number 1 qualifier driving this car. The Candies and Hughes entry out of Houma, Louisiana. In the 3 races we've seen thus far, it's all been upset. The number 1 qualifier has got to face the number 5 qualifier, Tommy Anderson. Can he upset Mark Oswald? One of the men that lost, the defending Big Bud Shootout champion, Frank Hawley.
Well, Frank Hawley, you did your job. You were out on Kenny about 0.04 of a second, much as you were the last time you two met.
Yeah, well, that was a little more, but it doesn't seem to matter a lot if you lose. Those guys have been running real good. There was a big discrepancy over lane choice. We changed, and it spun and shook the tires pretty good.
But you were ahead of him most of the way. When did you first see him?
The last mile an hour late. And he'd come by us real hard, and I figured there was a chance that he had caught us, but I wasn't real sure until I saw you guys run over to him. But I didn't see him till after the finish line.
You can't ask for better drag racing than that when you guys aren't even sure who won.
That's a good drag race.
And obviously disappointed Frank Hawley, the defending Big Bud Shootout champion, out in the first round of competition. Our number 1 qualifier, Mark Oswald's in the near lane. Tommy Anderson, the number 5 qualifier with 1,105 points, driving for Jim Ouimet and Alan Aronek, will be racing in the far lane. Mark Oswald for Candies and Hughes, qualified number 1, a staggering 1,265 points. The burnouts are completed, and now the concentration of the drivers will be on that electronic device standing in the center of the racetrack. It's called a Christmas tree, and it is designed to give an equal start to both drivers. The yellow light will flash for 0.4 of a second, and then the green light, and then both drivers leave. Tommy Anderson losing a bit of control. That gives an advantage to Mark Oswald, and the number 1 qualifier records the low elapsed time of round number 1 racing, 5.86 seconds at over 250 miles an hour. The pairings for round number 2, Mark Oswald with lane choice over Kenny Bernstein, and John Force will race Al Segrini. Let's go back to the pits and join Steve Evans.
This is what a supercharger pulley, the bottom pulley, is supposed to look like. Here you see Kenny Bernstein holding what is left of the bottom pulley on his car. At over 251 miles an hour, the RPM just exploded it.
Well, that's what happened, exactly. It was going so fast, spinning so hard, it just disintegrated it, exactly.
So it's really good news in a way, because what caused everything else was the blower belt slinging around.
Well, the blower belt came off, and the pulley also punctured an oil line, which threw oil all over the car, so it's not as bad as we thought. The only major damage is this.
And a little body damage. You guys are pop riveting that back together.
Well, we got to put some fiberglass back together. Magneto blew the cap off of it. We got a magneto to go in it, but you know, it's good news. This isn't supposed to happen. It could happen early in the race and you'd lose. It just happened at the right time.
Go get them.
Okay.
As Kenny Bernstein's crew continues to work, we're getting ready for the semifinals of the Big Bud Shootout. Big Bud Shootout at Indianapolis Raceway Park. I'm Dave McClelland along with Steve Evans, and we're ready for the semifinal round. This man, Mark Oswald, in his driving suit now, just a few moments ago, was hard at work.
Not too many years ago, you only took one of these drag racing engines apart if you thought something was wrong with it. You prided yourself on saying, never took the heads off all day. But there's too much at stake now. Plus, the engines are far better designed. They're really designed to come apart very quickly and go back together quickly. Even though nothing appeared to be wrong with the Candies in his engine, Mark Oswald and crew Tom Cattleman underneath have taken all 8 pistons out of it. They'll replace any that even look marginal, even if it's just a tight piston ring. Tom Cattleman under the car with the oil pan off, checking every one of the bearings, rod bearings and main bearings. What's so incredible is that a complete engine overhaul like this, and that's really what it is done in a matter of 45 minutes. Last time I took my car into a garage for similar service, I got it back in 2 months.
Steve, and you're not even trying to go 250 miles an hour. But these two drivers are Mark Oswald in the near lane, Kenny Bernstein in the far lane. Bernstein, of course, the upset winner over the defending Big Bud Shootout champion. Here in the semifinal round of racing, it's single elimination. There are 4 cars remaining. We started with 8. Mark Oswald came into this field the #1 qualifier, the best performing car in the country, and a great start by both drivers. Oswald losing a little traction. Bernstein moves ahead. He holds on at the finish line in a tremendous drag race. The crew, all the work between rounds pays off. And look at the times. 5.81 seconds at over 256 miles an hour as we watch again a great start for both drivers. The little wisp of smoke out of Mark Oswald's car indicates losing traction ever so slightly. Kenny Bernstein moving ahead in the middle of the track takes every advantage and marks his second upset win.
Coming out of his famed red funny car, Kenny Bernstein. An upset over Mark Oswald. Bernstein goes into the final of the Big Bud Shootout, and he goes in as the fastest driver in the history of funny car racing at over 256 miles an hour. The quickest elapsed time, 5:81.
All right, that's it, huh? How about them numbers? I can't even believe it. What a race it was. He was right there, I know, because I shut off and he went right by me, but it just hauled. It made it from one end to the other. It picked the front end up, it tingled, and then it just went boom, and I go down, and it was just hauling.
The ride of your life.
The fastest ever, I guess. That's beautiful.
Oh, congratulations. And you had a lot of work to do in the pit area, and you got it all done properly up here.
Well, of course. You know, we exploded the pulley like we talked. It ripped the mag off, but Armstrong, Guger, Schumann, the group, the Budweiser King group, they put it together. Bingo, here we are.
Kenny Bernstein in the finals for that $25,000 Big Bud Shootout Award will race one of these drivers, Al Segrini in the near lane, or John Force in the far lane. Force from Fullerton, California, a very active racer on the national event circuit, has yet to win a major championship. A very intense racer. Force had a chance to talk with Steve Evans earlier.
Certainly there's a big financial reward, but for you, the reward would be winning one of these big races.
There's no doubt for Budweiser, 25,000 is a drop in the bucket. To me, it's life or death.
No doubt about it. A win of this size would go a long way to providing a big boost for the career of John Force from Fullerton, California. But the man that's trying to stop it is in the near lane of this quarter-mile racetrack, and that is Al Segrini from Easton, Massachusetts. East meets West here in the Big Bud Shootout at Indianapolis Raceway Park. John Force and Al Segrini. And a red light start by John Force. He left the starting line too soon before the green light came on. Al Segrini elects to save his parts and pieces, shuts off and just coasts through at only 116 miles an hour. But in making that choice, he loses the lane choice in the finals to Kenny Bernstein. $25,000 at stake in the Big Bud Shootout. In the far lane, a pair of upset winners, a pair of underdogs made it to the finals. Some 5,000 horsepower on tap between these two cars as they prepare for their burnout. As these two drivers got ready for this final confrontation, Steve Evans had an opportunity to visit their pit areas and talk with both of them.
You could beat yourself going into this final. That's always possible in any drag race.
Well, I think so. The track conditions are not what they were earlier today. We were on the last run, which was a good run. It was on the verge then. Dale Armstrong, my crew chief, feels that it was one of those runs that could have gone either way. It could have been good. It could have been bad. So we're going to be real careful in the final not to beat ourselves.
Kenny Bernstein has everyone shaking their heads. In this heat and humidity to run 256.
I tell you, that's unbelievable. That's I'm happy for Kenny. That's a really good pass. I hope someday we can run that quick. But that's really phenomenal. I just keep shaking my head. 250. I ran 250 on Saturday here, and I thought that was flying. 256, just unbelievable.
So what are your guys going to do to combat that kind of performance?
Well, I felt as though the car left really strong in low gear. It would have run, maybe a mid-80 or high 80. So I mean, we're going to go out there and kind of leave it alone and hopefully go out and the track will be good, and we'll give them a good drag race.
For $25,000, you'd sacrifice a few pieces.
Well, what we have to do, we have to do. I mean, like you said, when you're down here, there's no coming back. It's all over. This is the final. We both worked very hard to get here. Kenny did, and the crew did. And they'll do a good job. We'll put it together and let it all hang out in this last run.
Both Kenny Bernstein and Al Segrini just made this Big Bud Shootout 8-car field at the recent Brainerd, Minnesota North Star Nationals. Bernstein qualified number 7. Al Segrini just made it, qualified number 8. In round number 1, Segrini the upset winner over Don Prudhomme. He took the measure of John Force in round 2. But for Kenny Bernstein, what a record-setting day. He defeated the number 1 qualifier, Mark Oswald, in the semifinals. In round number 1, it was the defending champion, Frank Hawley. Now it's the finals, $25,000 at stake, and up in smoke goes Al Segrini. It's Kenny Bernstein, the winner of the Big Bud Shootout. A tremendous display of driving ability. His crew, headed by Dale Armstrong, elated and awesome horsepower. 252 miles an hour, 5.90 seconds. Let's see how he did it. As the green light comes on, both cars leave the starting line. Bernstein very smoothly, but watch Al Segrini. The smoke starts, and then it gets worse, indicating a loss of traction. And at that point, the race is lost, and who knows it? The crew. Jumping for joy, Kenny Bernstein's crew with Dale Armstrong, the crew chief, saying, "We win."
A few weeks ago, Kenny Bernstein was not even qualified for the shootout. Now, he is on the receiving end of a $25,000 check. He did it in record-busting fashion. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you, Steve. What a turnaround, like you said, from a month ago. And I've said it before, and I know it's getting old, but Dale Armstrong, Mike Guger, Rick Schumann, Jeff Scarp, and the Budweiser crew, they just did it, and Dale really put it together.
Let's talk a minute about racing philosophy. You softened up the motor a little bit, didn't overpower the racetrack. You had a feeling Segrini would do just that. You called it.
We were hoping. That was Armstrong's plan of attack, and he's in charge of making those things happen with the race car. We talk about it, and we did. We softened it, and it did the cylinder when it left. It went da-da, and I was a little afraid of it. It did it on the burnout, but it picked it up and went on, and it's just history.
Your happiest moment in drag racing?
Top of the list. I can't think of it. It's been a long time coming, I'll tell you. But Brainerd was a good week. I mean, everything went right there. But here we are again, number 1 qualifier and doing this deal. I'm happy, real happy.
You're on a roll, Kenny Bernstein. Congratulations again.
Steve, appreciate it.
Our congratulations to Kenny Bernstein and all the competitors in the Big Bud Shootout, brought to you by Budweiser, the king of beers and proud sponsor of the U.S. Olympic team. For all you do, this Bud's for you. And a presentation of Diamond P Sports. Diamond P Sports presents championship drag racing from the National Hot Rod Association, the Big Bud Shootout. Featuring a showdown between 8 of the finest fiberglass-bodied funny cars, driven by 8 of the best drivers in the world. They thread the needle through the quarter mile at speeds topping 260 miles an hour with elapsed times of less than 6 seconds. Welcome to Indianapolis Raceway Park in Indianapolis, Indiana, the largest drag racing facility in the world for the richest drag race in the world, the 3rd annual Big Bud Shootout. It was at the first shootout that Frank Hawley, soon to become world champion and driver of the famed Chi-Town Hustler, defeated one of the true legends of this sport when in the far lane he outran Don Prudhomme for victory. Last year saw Kenny Bernstein, a last-minute qualifier, totally dominate the event, finally subduing Al Segrini for the championship and securing the $25,000 first prize. Again this year, the 8 fastest funny cars in the world, determined through season-long qualifying, will meet to contest for the lion's share of the over $40,000 purse. Hello, everybody. I'm Dave McClellan, and this is the Chi-Town Hustler, sporting a brand new paint job. You know, this is a fiberglass replica of a Dodge Daytona body, and to the racer, the beauty goes more than skin deep. Steve Evans can tell us about it.
Dave, you take the funny car out of its plastic wrapper, as we have done with Billy Meyer's machine, and you discover an animal of a race car. Let's take a tour from front to back. The first thing you'll discover is the chrome weight bar. Now, that is filled with lead shot to help keep the front end down under varying track conditions. Also mounted forward for ballast is the fuel tank. It holds 14 gallons, about 11 of which are used on each run. Appropriately enough, on either side of the fuel tank are the mandatory onboard fire extinguishers. Now, there really is no front suspension on Billy's car. It's solid. On some, you'll find a rocker arm style independent front suspension. Here we have a pair of heavy-duty oil filters, and then we move to the meat of the matter. a fuel-injected, supercharged aluminum Hemi racing engine. No one's really sure how much horsepower they put out because there's not a dyno in the world capable of measuring it. Let's call it 3,000. They do. The exhaust headers really do more than just exhaust. They also furnish some necessary downforce for traction. Moving back to the cockpit area, it's pretty simple as far as race cars go. Billy has a handbrake. Attached to that is the fuel shut-off lever. This lever activates the fire bottles if necessary. This is a shifter. He only moves it once, low to high, about half track. This is the reverser, used only when he backs up after the burnout. And this particular lever and this one are fuel mixture controls. He can richen or lean the motor from the cockpit. Not much upholstery because with a 5-layer fire suit, you're pretty well wearing the necessary padding. The tires are limited to 17 inches across, 114 inches around. This particular little aluminum tank here is really just a breather tank. It collects any oil being blown out of the motor and keeps it off the racetrack. The wheelie bars here are also mandatory. Without them, cars have been known to flip over backwards. I had a chance to talk to some of the racers involved in today's Big Bud Shootout. I asked them if there was a car that they particularly feared. Here's what they said.
I'd have to go with Mark Oswald. It's momentum right now. The car the last month has just been flying. And in fact, he beat us. We run our second quickest run ever a few weeks ago, and he just flat out run us on that in that race. So I'd have to go with Mark Oswald, but in this Big Bud Shootout, everyone's tough.
Well, right now I would have to say it's Mark Oswald and the Candies and Hughes car. They've been running extremely well in the last 60 days. They've picked the pace up and passed all of us. So I would have to say, except for ourselves, which we would always say, they would be the main one.
Well, I don't know. I think there's one car right now that could be a little ahead. The Candies and Hughes car may be a taste, but not much. We're going to chase him down, I hope, but otherwise it's a toss-up.
This is Mark Oswald, the driver they're all talking about, the driver of the dreaded Candies and Hughes car from the bayous of Louisiana. Mark, you seem to be enjoying a bit of an intimidation factor here.
Yeah, right now we are, but when the car runs that good, it's also right on the borderline of going down the racetrack, and it's real hard to keep it that way. We got guys like Frank Hawley yesterday who showed real consistency, and, the car really ran good, so it's not as much an advantage as you might think.
Mark Oswald, the strong favorite and #1 qualifier going into the first round of the Big Bud Shootout. Understand that these drivers have been going through a qualifying procedure throughout the entire year. Based upon their qualifying position at NHRA national events, they earned the points that gave them the right to compete in this $44,000 Big Bud Shootout. In NHRA style racing, the #1 qualifier races #5. #2 races #6. #3 races #7. And here, our first pair of cars, we find Tim Gross, who ended up the #4 qualifier with 1,210 points, racing the #8 qualifier. That is Tom McEwen. He qualified #8, just barely making it into the field with 1,070 points. To give you an idea of how close the field is, only 270 points separated Tom McEwen from Mark Oswald, the #1 qualifier. There's the reason why the qualifying was so close. Look at this race. Tom McEwen in the far lane, just barely pulling ahead of Tim Gross at the finish. His elapsed time, 5.89 seconds. His speed at the finish line, 254 miles an hour. Side by side, both cars launch off the starting line as if they are one. From a standing start, they cover 1,320 feet down this racing surface. Tom McEwen and Tim Gross, each struggling to get ahead of the other as the broad yellow stripe in the center indicates the finish line, and it is Tom McEwen the winner. From Fountain Valley, California, Tom McEwen advancing into the semifinals of the Big Bud Shootout. The Big Bud Shootout is being brought to you by Budweiser. For all you do, this Bud's for you. More first round shootout action in just a moment. Back at Indianapolis Raceway Park in the first round racing in the Big Bud Shootout. The dramatic burnout by Billy Meyer in the near lane with his competitor Frank Hawley right behind him and coming out of the cloud of smoke. 2 years ago, it was Frank Hawley winning the inaugural Big Bud Shootout. He is currently the reigning world champion and this year qualified #3. His competitor from Waco, Texas is Billy Meyer, and Billy qualified #7.
Billy, you've got an opponent first round in the Big Bud Shootout that's famous for his consistency, Frank Hawley.
Yeah, they've been real consistent all year. Over the last 3 years, have been quite consistent. I guess our main thing here is that the consistency that they have had is about a tenth off of the pace we've been able to perform at this year, so hopefully it stays that way.
Billy Meyer's level of performance has been improving at practically every event this season. For Frank Hawley, his qualifying this year has been exceptionally good, thus his #3 spot here in the Big Bud Shootout. But the level of consistency has fallen off somewhat in NHRA national event competition. But that doesn't appear to be the case in this race. Frank Hawley stretching his lead over Billy Meyer by 2 car lengths at the finish line. 5.81 seconds his elapsed time. His speed a fine 250 miles an hour. Frank Hawley, the first ever winner of the Big Bud Shootout, advancing into the semifinals. This is the man all of drag racing was talking about last year. In the course of 3 short weeks, Kenny Bernstein won 3 major NHRA national event titles, including the Big Bud Shootout, and in the process garnered over $100,000 in cash, a never-before accomplished feat in the sport of championship drag racing. He had his problems qualifying for last year's Big Bud Shootout. That's not the case this year. Kenny Bernstein, as the defending champion, comes in a very strong #2 position. He is racing against Dale Puldy. Puldy qualified in the #7 spot, but bear in mind all 8 cars are very closely bunched in this field. Let's go down to Steve with Frank Hawley.
Frank Hawley, who tasted victory in the inaugural Big Bud Shootout 2 years ago, that's 1 down.
Well, we were concerned about Billy, and we always just try and take it 1 round at a time. I think the car run pretty well, and just like a couple years ago, I don't even know who run the next round.
Is the track good enough where you can keep the pedal down all the way, the full quarter mile?
That run we did, but we had softened it up. When we had qualified, the track was a little loose. I had to lift a bit, but it did run very well. That time we softened it up, and maybe we softened it a little too much, but...
581.
Maybe that's a little too much. We'll find out. We'll watch the rest of the competition.
Okay, Frank. Going into the semifinals as Chi-Town Hustler.
A very personable Frank Hawley waiting for his crew to come take him back to the pits to prepare for the semifinals. Kenny Bernstein in the near lane, by virtue of his qualifying position, has the lane choice, and he selects the lane nearest the camera. Bernstein, based in Dallas, Texas, one of those famed Texas Thunder nitro-burning funny cars. His competition comes from Granada Hills, California. His name is Dale Puldy.
Dale, if you would tell me about the racetrack. It is famous for its elapsed times. Is it in that kind of condition for the Big Bud Shootout?
I believe it will be. There's a bit of rain coming and going right now, so that's going to kind of mess up everybody's tune-up a little bit. And we've been doing a little bit of testing here, and we've had our share of troubles on the track, and I think it's going to be a hit-and-miss deal right off the bat for us.
Both drivers concentrating on the start. And Kenny Bernstein with a very slight advantage, but at the middle of the course it appears Puldy coming on. At the finish line it is Bernstein by just about a car length. 5.95 second elapsed time. His speed 247 miles an hour, picking him up at the middle of the race course. You see Kenny Bernstein just slowly start to pull ahead. Dale Puldy in the far lane making it a very close race. You see just how close. Only 0.02 of a second separating the two.
Kenny Bernstein's win streak continues in this Big Bud Shootout. 3 win lights last year in victory and 1 down now.
Well, that's the toughest one, Steve, the first round, and Dale Puldy's a good competitor. I was plenty worried.
By 2 100ths you won it.
Is that right? I knew it was going to be close. We spun the tires quite a bit. She was pretty loose.
It's tougher this year, I think, than it was last year.
Well, yeah, I think so. Their cars are all good. They have been, but they're all running better this year, and they're all closer together, so it makes it tougher.
Okay, Kenny Bernstein, he goes into the semis.
The defending champion still in competition, maybe 2 years in a row. Bernstein paying recognition to the man he just defeated. Here's the man they're all talking about this year. This is the #1 qualifier. He is the man that everyone says is the car to beat. Mark Oswald driving for Candies and Hughes against the 3-time world champion, Raymond Beadle. Beadle has not had the most successful season of his career, while on the other hand, Mark Oswald has been ultimately successful both in qualifying, as is evidenced by his #1 spot, and in actual side-by-side competition. Driving for the team of Candies and Hughes, Mark Oswald, your favorite and #1 qualifier. For Raymond Beadle, the number 5 qualifier but obvious underdog, you have to wonder what his strategy is.
Our car, I think, can run equally as well. They've run quicker than we have. The best our car's ever runs have been low 70s, 71 or 72, but we think the car's capable of running in the 60s, and one thing about it, you know where you stand, so you got to go for it first round.
So you're willing to burn a motor if you have to get by him?
Yeah, well, hopefully we won't have to burn it, but I mean, if that's what it takes, that's what we'll do.
Raymond Beadle may be outclassed on paper, but never conceding an inch to the number 1 qualifier, Mark Oswald. Don't forget, there's 2 important considerations in every race you're watching. The first and most important is winning the race. The secondary consideration is the elapsed time, because the racer with the lower elapsed time of the pair in the next round has the lane choice, gets to run in the preferred lane that he selects. So keep that in mind in every race. The elapsed time, very important to these racers. Mark Oswald in the near lane. In the far lane, Raymond Beadle. What a start for Beadle. Oswald goes up in smoke, and it is Beadle pulling ahead. A tremendous run for Beadle, and what an upset. The man they feared most down to defeat the Blue Max crew, congratulating each other. Look at the elapsed time, 5.75 seconds. Beadle slowing the Blue Max car to a stop as the shroud line flailing in the air. We watch again as Beadle and Oswald move almost together off the starting line, but then things go sour for Mark Oswald. The tires losing traction. The smoke you see, that means they're spinning. But for Raymond Beadle, he just pulls ahead to the finish line and wins the race.
Well, for Mark Oswald, who, as you heard earlier, many of the drivers had picked to go all the way here, is out in this first round of competition as Raymond Beadle steps up with a shocking 5.75 elapsed time. Mark Oswald trying to remove that carbon fiber helmet, and unfortunately we won't see him smile too much. No one expected that from Raymond.
Well, he ran good. I think we could have run good. The car just moved to the center line instantly off the starting line. I had to fight it back, and it was just all over the racetrack.
Well, good job, Mark.
Thanks anyway, see.
What a shock for Mark Oswald, and even Steve Evans at a loss for words as the racers head back to the pits to get ready for the semifinals. Raymond Beadle against Frank Hawley, Kenny Bernstein against Tom McEwen at Indianapolis Raceway Park, the Big Bud Shootout. The semifinal action of the Big Bud Shootout at Indianapolis Raceway Park. It was 2 years ago that Frank Hawley won the top prize of the shootout. This year, he is now in the semifinals, but is in an underdog role as he has to race the man that has established the lowest elapsed time in competition, Raymond Beadle, driving the Blue Max. That stunning 5.75 second elapsed time in the first round as he upset the favorite Mark Oswald gives Beadle the control. He has the lane choice in this race against Hawley, and that can be all important. The lanes of this quarter-mile racetrack can actually change throughout the day. Thus, the lane choice for the driver can be one of the most important considerations that he has to face. The other is mechanical problems. For Frank Hawley, he had very little between rounds. But for Raymond Beadle, a different story.
Raymond, the Blue Max was trailing some oil on the return road headed back to the pit area. Everything okay?
Yeah, everything's fine. Everyone thought that maybe we'd heard a rod or something. What happened, the chute didn't come out down there in the car. The track's a little rough on the other end. The car got to bouncing real bad. And we had one of the our old oil pans on it, didn't have a patch, so we just kind of have a split here on the seam. But other than that, everything's fine.
So it ran 5.75 and didn't hurt a thing?
No, it didn't hurt anything. In fact, we think we can come back and run that good, maybe a little bit better.
Well, you're going to have to, because Frank Hawley was the second quickest car in that first round.
Yeah, well, when we went into this thing, we knew we didn't have lane choice first round. We were running the quickest car of the whole deal, and we were the quickest car of the event because he had run a 69. The best we'd have run was a 92. We knew the car ran pretty well yesterday. It broke a rocker arm. However, we did break another rocker arm on that 75 run, so we know we got a little bit left.
All the work is over, and it is now up to both drivers. Raymond Beadle in the Blue Max, Frank Hawley in the Chi-Town Hustler. The concentration level extremely high at this point. These drivers thinking about one thing only, getting a good start, getting the car off the starting line and down that racetrack as quick as possible. Raymond Beadle losing traction right off the start for Frank Hawley. Another great run. He crosses the finish line, and look at the elapsed time. 5.81 seconds. That consistency that you strive for is there. The happy crew reflecting the joy of the Chi-Town Hustler folks as they're in the finals. Look over in the far lane, the blue car. Raymond Beadle loses traction instantly off the starting line. Already, the crew for the Chi-Town Hustler is reacting as Frank Hawley heads to the finish line.
For the second time in 3 years, Frank Hawley goes into the final round of the Big Bud Shootout, 581.
Well, that's our game plan, isn't it? 82, 81. I think that can do it. Might be an interesting story here if Kenny Bernstein wins this round, and you'll have your 2 previous winners in the final round.
Did you have to drive with a soft touch there, Frank, or hammer down?
No, I mean, we've been softening the car up a little bit like I guess you should, rather than rely on the driver. We just floored it. It rattled somewhat, shifted the car, and sailed across the finish line.
Let's go back to the starting line and see if indeed Kenny Bernstein will be your final round opponent.
Steve, back at the line, it's Tom McEwen that will be trying to prevent Kenny Bernstein from becoming the first ever 2-time Big Bud Shootout champion. But McEwen's got to be thinking about one thing. He has the lane choice. He took the far lane, but he watched Raymond Beadle, the quickest car in competition today, go up in smoke right in front of him. Bernstein, on the other hand, watched Frank Hawley lay down a picture-perfect 5.81 second elapsed time. Tom McEwen in the far lane, the defending champion, Kenny Bernstein in the near lane, the winner to face Frank Hawley. A great start for both cars. It is McEwen beginning to pull ahead at the finish line by a car length. Tom McEwen wins the race and goes into the Big Bud Shootout finals against Frank Hawley. 5.84 seconds. The lane choice in the final will be Frank Hawley's, but this race going to Tom McEwen. This is an exact opposite of the race you just saw between Frank Hawley and Raymond Beadle. Tom McEwen not bothered at all about loss of traction. His main concern was getting to the finish line ahead of the defending champion, Kenny Bernstein. For the longtime veteran McEwen, a big win.
Dave, another round of the Big Bud Shootout where neither driver was sure if he'd won or lost. Tom McEwen, you won. You're in the final.
Thank you. You know what the time was?
584.
584. Not bad.
Not bad at all. You're looking sharp on the starting line.
Oh, man. Yeah, I left pretty good, I thought, that time. Well, you know, it's funny what money will do for guys.
Nice carrot out there, huh?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Tom McEwen and Frank Hawley.
The final set for the Big Bud Shootout. It is McEwen against Hawley, with Frank Hawley having lane choice. The final of the Big Bud Shootout. $25,000 riding on this single race between 2 cars. In the near lane, it is Frank Hawley. He won this race 2 years ago. Tom McEwen in the far lane. The man that has been around the sport for over 2 decades, running better this year than ever before. Working his way into the finals from the number 8 qualifying position, just barely making the program. In fact, he was tied with Ed the Ace McCulloch for the number 8 spot, but by virtue of earning his points earlier, it was McEwen into the 8-car field rather than McCulloch. All the work is completed, all the effort of the crew finished. Now it rides solely on the driver. And it's Frank Hawley up in smoke, and look at McEwen go. $25,000 to Tom McEwen, 5.82 seconds, your Big Bud champion, and 260 miles an hour. Mr. Consistency, Frank Hawley lost it all right here. The car losing traction, going up in smoke. He gives the win automatically to Tom McEwen. But on this run, McEwen thunders across that finish line at 260 miles an hour to become the Big Bud champion. And how important is a win like this? Just look at the disappointment on the face of Frank Hawley, the runner-up. Let's go to Steve with Tom McEwen.
Your crew did a marvelous job. At 260 mile an hour speeds, they are rarely seen.
Yeah, my crew is just great. I don't say about them. My help is good. My sponsors are great. You know, I'm driving pretty good for an old man this year. And, you know, what can I say? I'm real happy. And the Coors people, I'll tell you, I want to thank Budweiser for putting this race on and taking a chance that another beer company could rain on their parade. They're a class bunch. My hat's off to them. And, you know, you Budweiser people buy the beer, and hats off to you.
And our congratulations to you, Tom McEwen, the Big Bud Shootout champion. The Big Bud Shootout was brought to you by Budweiser, the king of beers. Reach for that distinctively clean, crisp taste that says Budweiser for all you do. This Bud's for you. The Big Bud Shootout, featuring a showdown between 8 of the finest fiberglass-bodied funny cars, driven by 8 of the best drivers in the world. They thread the needle through the quarter mile in less than 6 seconds. Drag racing from the NHRA. The long, smoky burnout of the nitromethane-fueled funny car. The distinguishing mark of this ever-popular category of NHRA drag racing. Today, the quickest of this exotic breed meet for a 260-mile-an-hour confrontation at Indianapolis Raceway Park. At the heart of all that action is this 2,500 horsepower racing engine, which if you cover it with a fiberglass plastic body, you end up with today's modern funny car. Hello, everybody. I'm Dave McClelland, and welcome to the 4th annual Big Bud Shootout, being contested at Indianapolis Raceway Park, the premier drag racing facility anywhere in the United States. We have today the 8 fastest funny cars in the world racing for a $30,000 top prize. Those 8 cars are down on the starting line, all staged up and ready to go. Working with me today is Steve Evans. Steve?
David, like hungry, open-mouthed animals, these funny cars are ready for action. In drag racing parlance, the engines are set on kill. Crews are ready to replace entire power plants between rounds if that's what it takes. As far as favorites are concerned, well, there's really only 2. Kenny Bernstein, who's virtually assured of winning this year's World Championship. He also holds both the speed and elapsed time world records. Then there's Tom the Mongoose McEwen, who won the shootout a year ago and has been the quickest car in time trials this weekend. What we have here, indeed, is a shootout of the best.
Steve, the 8 quickest funny cars based on qualifying position will meet in the first round. The number 4 qualifier, Rick Johnson, racing Tim Gross, who qualified in the number 8 position. The number 3 qualifier is Dale Paldy, racing the defending champion, number 7, Tom McEwen. The number 2 qualifier, Ed the Ace McCulloch, against the number 6 qualifier, Little John Lombardo, driving the Blue Max. And the number 1 qualifier, Kenny Bernstein, against the number 5 qualifier, John Force. The Big Bud Shootout is underway. The 8 quickest funny cars in the world, and our first pair finds the number 4 qualifier, Rick Johnson, in the near lane against Tim Gross in the far lane. These racers have been competing all season long through a series of 9 events based upon their qualifying position at that race to earn points for the right to race in the Big Bud Shootout. As our first pair of cars complete those long, smoky burnouts to heat the tires, Tim Gross comes to us from Saugus, California. He qualified in the number 8 position, just making it into the field. He's racing one of the quickest drivers in the world. Rick Johnson, driving for Roland Leong, has an elapsed time of 5.58 seconds to his credit. The Big Bud Shootout is a lot like the NFL Pro Bowl. Here you find the 8 best funny car racers in the world competing in a special event with a $30,000 top prize. Tim Gross, following the directions of his crew, pulling into the tracks that he left when he did his burnout, trying to find the best traction. In the near lane, it's Rick Johnson, patiently waiting. He inches forward into those staging beams, the electronic light beams, and it's a green light start for both cars. A close race. Rick Johnson pulls ahead in the middle of the course, and at the finish line, it is Rick Johnson, 5.84 seconds. His speed over 253 miles an hour. Let's go back and look at the start once again. The advantage off the starting line, be it ever so slight, appears to go to Rick Johnson. But Tim Gross is right beside him as they head through the first few hundred feet of this race course. At the middle of the track, you see that advantage now beginning to be stretched out into almost a car-length lead for Johnson in the near lane. As they approach the timing trap and the finish line, Johnson, by a half a car length, he actually ran slower, but the advantage at the start was his.
You can have all the horsepower in the world, but without a driver like Rick Johnson who can leave that starting line ahead of the other driver, you don't win drag races. You ran 100 slower and beat Tim Gross.
Thank you, Steve. This is the kind of thing I need in this camp to keep the morale up.
That's the kind of thing Roland Leong demands of his drivers.
I'm telling you, you don't hang around long if you can't get good lights here.
But you're going to have to probably run better than 580s if you're going to win this event.
Yeah, we had the clutch set up a little bit soft, just trying to get around this first round deal. There's a lot of power left in it. Roland's doing a good job with it, and he'll bring it around.
Nice drive.
Thanks, Steve.
A big win for Rick Johnson. The Big Bud Shootout is being brought to you by Budweiser. Beechwood aged for that distinctively clean, crisp taste that makes Budweiser the king of beers. For all you do, this Bud's for you. We'll be back with more Big Bud Shootout from Indianapolis. Hard at work getting their mount ready for the second round of competition. Rick Johnson has advanced into the semifinals, and this between-round action is a complete check of all the components on that 2,500 horsepower engine. Back at the starting line, our next pair is fired and ready to go. Dale Paldy in the near lane will be racing Tom McEwen, the defending champion of this Big Bud Shootout. In time trials, McEwen recorded an outstanding 5.67 seconds elapsed time. The time it took him to travel a quarter of a mile. That's only 1,320 feet in a straight line, leaving the starting line from a standing start. For Dale Paldy, his number 3 qualifying position indicating a season-long standard of high performance. Paldy hailing from Granada Hills, California. Earlier, we asked his competition, Tom McEwen, if he could repeat as the Big Bud champ, how would he spend 30 grand?
Oh, my horses have a place for it.
Race horses?
Oh, yes, sir.
They have a way of making a rich man a poor man.
Yeah, they're even worse than this. For a money sport, the horse racing is even more expensive than this, but if the horse finally breaks down, you can eat it. And you can't do that with these cars.
Two very expensive occupations and avocations for Tom the Mongoose McEwen, the defending champion in this Big Bud Shootout. It will be McEwen in the far lane, Dale Paldy in the near lane. Paldy driving a Buick Somerset Regal for Tom McEwen. He's got the Corvette fiberglass body draped over that 2,500 horsepower, and both cars losing traction. McEwen recovers first and heads to the finish line. It certainly wasn't picture perfect, but it was a big win for Tom McEwen. 6.49 seconds, his speed 244 miles an hour, and you can see what the loss of traction means to the performance. This is something every driver dreads. When you leave the starting line, the front wheels come up, and then the back wheels lose traction, and the tires start smoking. When they smoke like that, they're burning rubber. They're not going anywhere. They're just spinning madly. For McEwen, he backpedals, gets back in it. The car recovers traction and goes on to win and advance into the semifinals. Tom McEwen climbing out of his car in the shutdown area. He'll take a win any way he can get it. The long, smoky burnout to heat the tires to provide the traction for Ed the Ace McCulloch as his competition gets ready to approach the burnout area. Little John Lombardo driving the Blue Max, owned by Raymond Beadle of Dallas, Texas. Rolls forward into a puddle of water. Just plain old H2O to let the tires break loose initially, and then they start to smoke. Lombardo, car owner Raymond Beadle, and the entire crew hoping that the burnout will be sufficient to get the traction they need. They saw the car just in front of them go up in smoke, and they need every advantage they can get to beat this driver, Ed McCulloch, driving for car owner Larry Minor. Little John Lombardo moved into the Blue Max earlier this year when owner Raymond Beadle decided to devote more time to his business and less to the driving chores. Lombardo has had an up and down season thus far, but he earned enough points to get into this Big Bud Shootout. For the number 2 qualifier, Ed McCulloch, it's been a great year thus far. That number 2 qualifying position gives him lane choice over Lombardo. In the first round of competition, the quicker qualifier gets the lane choice. In every round thereafter, it is the man with the quickest elapsed time in the preceding round. So in addition to winning the race, every driver is trying to establish a quick elapsed time, hopefully to gain him lane choice in the next round of competition. Lombardo is ready. McCulloch is ready, and it's a green light start. And it is McCulloch streaking ahead as some problems occur for Lombardo. And McCulloch and the crew very happy with that run. 5.82 seconds. His speed, 254 miles an hour. Some problems right off the starting line for Lombardo. He had to back out of it, and a disappointing day for Raymond Beadle and the Blue Max crew. Here is John Force. He is not in an enviable position. In spite of a 5.70 second elapsed time in time trials, he has to run the #1 qualifier, Kenny Bernstein. In the traditional NHRA single elimination tournament, the #1 qualifier runs #5, as we saw. #2 runs #6, and so on throughout the 8-car field. Let's go to Steve with Ed McCulloch.
Ace, were you concerned after watching McEwen and Pulley smoke the tires in front of you?
Well, yeah, Steve, but, you know, the thing of it is I know that everybody's coming into this and they're going to be hopped up. We went with our game plan. We didn't really hop it up. It didn't run any better. But 82 was good enough to get by first round, so we'll see what happens now.
See you second round.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Ed McCulloch has been in the winner's circle before, and he wants to win the $30,000 first prize. This man wants to be the first repeat winner. He won this event 2 years ago and has certainly been the dominant force in funny car racing this year. Bernstein qualified to earn points at this race, 4 #1 positions, 3 #2 spots. His competition, John Force. Earlier, we asked John, after all his years of racing, is he still having fun?
There's no doubt, yeah. You know, the excitement, you know, like yesterday when we ran that 70 and we got out the end and I was giving you big old hugs down there. I know that's a little corny, but you've been watching me do this for a lot of years, and that was a great feeling. And of course before the ink dried, McEwen ran that 67 and took all the thunder away, but it was fun while it lasted.
I've always said about John Force, what you see is what you get.
Yeah, well, it's maybe don't look so good sometimes, but we're doing the best we can.
Steve, John's 5.70 second elapsed time in time trials proves that he can run with the best of them. And seriously, we at Diamond B Sports wonder when it will be that John Force will win his first NHRA national event. It's bound to happen. And John Force is giving Bernstein all he can handle. A great start for Force, but Bernstein pulls it out right at the finish line. Bernstein's crew, Dale Armstrong, the crew chief, and the rest of the gang just thrilled to death. Look at the elapsed time, 5.69 seconds, and the fastest speed in eliminations at 260 miles an hour. The dominant force in funny car racing, as we said, has been Kenny Bernstein, and this is why. John Force outdrove him at the starting line. He left before Bernstein, still got the green light, but look at the power of Bernstein from the last half of the quarter mile. As they thunder towards that finish line, Bernstein pulls ahead and wins it.
Well, Kenny Bernstein struggled a little bit in time trials for the Big Bud Shootout, but struggle no longer, Kenny. 569, 260 miles an hour.
Oh, super. It's maybe come back around, Dale, and the guys have been working awful hard. It's been tough, as you said, Steve. Hasn't been good for the Budweiser King the last couple of days, but today started nice.
First half of the track, a good race with John Force.
Yeah, I think I was a little late. I think he left on me a taste. You know, sometimes those things happen. He's a good leaver, and we chased him down. That's what had to happen, but finally got through it down there.
Into the semifinals goes Kenny Bernstein.
Kenny Bernstein won this event 2 years ago. He stands the chance of being the first 2-time winner ever. Our pairings for the semifinals, Ed McCulloch and Rick Johnson, with McCulloch having the lane choice. Kenny Bernstein with the lane choice over the defending champion, Tom the Mongoose McEwen. McEwen has his own ideas about repeating as the Big Bud champion. As they get ready for the semifinal round of action, we'll be coming back for the Big Bud Shootout. Raceway Park, I'm Dave McClelland, along with Steve Evans, and a huge crowd on hand for this 4th annual running of the Big Bud Shootout. The finest funny cars in the world doing battle for a $30,000 top prize. Ed the Ace McCulloch driving for car owner Larry Miner against Rick Johnson, who's driving for his car owner Roland Leon. In the first round, Rick Johnson defeated Tim Gross, while Ed McCulloch blasted past John Lombardo. Johnson knows it will take a tremendous effort to match up against McCulloch. When we talk about commitment, earlier you heard Tom McEwen discussing his race horses and his racing, and both of them are very expensive. It takes a dedication of time, effort, and most particularly money to campaign one of these funny cars. Back in the pit area, it looks like an 18-wheeler parking lot. These are the specialized racing rigs that support these funny cars. Nowhere is the effort more evident than in the team of Larry Miner and Ed McCulloch.
Well, you know, the Larry Minor, Ed McCullough team came to play hardball when you look at this forest of pistons and rods all ready for duty if they're needed. Certainly the piston is the most vulnerable part of these nitro-burning engines and have to be replaced often. Now, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's about 7 runs where the pistons here, if all 8 had to be replaced. So they are definitely ready with an arsenal of parts.
Steve, not only are they ready, but every team in competition in this Big Bud Shootout has the same type of backup. We estimate that there's over $250,000 in parts and pieces. That's minimum alone just to support one of these funny cars, while the car owners will tell you they spend between $750,000 and $1 million a year campaigning one of these cars around the country. They're gathered here today, though, for the shootout of the best, the Big Bud Shootout. We're down to 4 cars remaining. This is the semifinal round. Rick Johnson in the far lane, Ed McCullough in the near lane. The responsibility now falls on the driver. The work is over for the crew. It is up to the driver to stage the car properly, leave at the right time, trying to gain an advantage off the starting line and win the race. It's Ed McCullough off first. Rick Johnson smoking the tires, and McCullough, by just a fender length, wins the race and goes into the finals of the Big Bud Shootout. A close race, 5.85 seconds at 254 miles an hour for McCullough. As we watch again, you see both cars with a bit of an advantage appearing to go to McCullough, leaves the starting line. Just a few feet off the line, Rick Johnson begins to lose traction. He backpedals. In other words, he lifts his foot off the throttle trying to regain traction. He does it masterfully. But in spite of the brilliant driving job, Johnson runs out of time. McCullough, by a fender length, wins it.
Ed McCullough, take me from the starting line through that race. What happened?
Well, the thing left okay. Went out there, spun the tire a little bit. Not real bad, but it wasn't real strong. We just sort of lumbered down through there. You know?
Did you see him smoke the tires and disappear?
No, I never saw him.
That's the kind of races you like or you never see.
You got that one.
Into the finals.
Well, we'll see what Bernstein runs here. They're running awful good, but I'm glad we got a shot at him.
Okay, let's go back to the starting line and indeed find out who Ed the Ace McCullough will race in the final round of the Big Bud Shootout.
Steve, it may be a matter of point of view, but I wouldn't call 254 miles an hour lumbering. Here's the man everyone's trying to beat, Kenny Bernstein. Earlier, we talked about the financial investment it takes to run a funny car. One of the largest portions of the budget goes to people, the crew that works on each car.
A funny car pit area between rounds functions much like an operating room in a hospital. It takes as many as 6 people to get Kenny Bernstein's car apart and back together again, and each of them is a specialist. One individual will work on the bottom end of the engine, checking the bearings. Another will work on adjusting the valves, replacing the cylinder heads. Yet another will remove all 8 pistons, take them in the trailer, check for any tight rings, anything that may be wrong there. All in all, they can do this in a matter of minutes. It would take the average garage days.
Sometimes even weeks, Steve. Kenny Bernstein will be in the far lane. He has the lane choice. Tom McEwen, the defending champion, is in the near lane. Both drivers trying to find exactly the right spot with the assistance of their crews and crew chiefs as they approach that starting line. They want the best racing service possible. Both drivers with intense concentration on the Christmas tree trying to get the perfect start. It's a great lead for both drivers. McEwen a little close to the center line and Bernstein by a couple of car lengths. Dale Armstrong, a great driver in his own right, extremely happy. Another 5.69 second elapsed time. His speed 256 miles an hour as Bernstein will be matched against Ed McCullough in the Big Bud Shootout final. That confrontation coming up next. Final of the Big Bud Shootout. It comes down to these 2 men, Kenny Bernstein and Ed McCullough, the 2 best funny car drivers in the world throughout the entire season, now meeting for the championship.
You know, Kenny's been tough all year. I mean, Kenny and Dale and their crew, I mean, you know, you just got to hand it to them. I mean, the guys are awesome, you know, and they run real well. They're a very high professional team, and they've got all the technology, and the guys use it to their advantage, and they're really tough. They're tough all the time.
Go get them.
We'll give them heck.
Well, Ace told me before we started this Bud Shootout thing today that his car, it's a new race car, as you know, and it's very difficult. He's having trouble hooking it up. He has a tendency to smoke the tires, so I'm sure that he's thinking about a lot, and he also probably, as you know, has to put a little bit in it to catch up. So hopefully we can just repeat and everything will work fine for us. I hope that takes place.
Bernstein, by virtue of the 5.69 second elapsed time, has lane choice, and he took the far lane from our camera position. The huge crowd, this is what they came to see. The two best drivers in the world coming together in the final of the Big Bud Shootout. Bernstein, his worst qualifying position throughout all of this season was in the number 10 spot. He had 4 number 1 qualifying spots, 3 number 2. While Bernstein was at the top of the ladder, McCulloch reached the Big Bud Shootout based upon his consistent performance. The best he did was 2 number 2 qualifying spots at the Gator Nationals and the Southern Nationals, but throughout the entire season, he was consistent in his qualifying, and that led to this Big Bud Shootout, 2 wins, and now he is in the final, racing for the $30,000 top prize against Kenny Bernstein. Both cars set. A green light start, and McCulloch's car does not hook up. He loses traction. Bernstein pulls ahead, and he wins it. An elated through a sterling performance, 5.70 second elapsed time for Bernstein. As we go back and look again, we heard Kenny talk earlier about McCulloch's new car. He said it has problems hooking up. Watch. You see the smoke off the tires. He is losing traction, and that lost him his chance for victory as Bernstein at that point pulled ahead by nearly 2 car lengths and held it all the way to the finish line at the end of this quarter-mile racing service. There is a $30,000 win for Kenny Bernstein.
Well, there have been 4 Big Bud Shootouts, and Kenny Bernstein, you've won 2 of them. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, Steve, very much. It's a great feeling. It's as good as the first time, and I didn't know if it could be, but it is. And I want to thank Budweiser, Motorcraft, and Ford, and Kangaroo Shoes, and all our fans and friends. That's the main thing.
Talk about consistency. 2 569s and a 570 to finish it off.
Well, that's good. We were hoping it would hold. We were a little concerned, but Dale said, let's leave it. If it'll just do that again, we'll be fine. And hats off to Dale and the crew again for a super job.
Outstanding. Congratulations again to Kenny Bernstein, defeating Ed McCulloch to become the first 2-time Big Bud Shootout champion.
Our congratulations to all the competitors in the Big Bud Shootout, and most particularly this man, Ed McCulloch. For Steve Evans, this is Dave McClellan saying so long from Indianapolis Raceway Park. The Big Bud Shootout has been brought to you by Budweiser. Beechwood aged for that clean, crisp taste. This Bud's for you. The Big Bud Shootout has been a presentation of Diamond P Sports. Diamond P Sports presents championship drag racing from the National Hot Rod Association, the Big Bud Shootout. Featuring a showdown between 8 of the finest fiberglass-bodied funny cars driven by 8 of the best drivers in the world. They thread the needle through the quarter mile at speeds topping 270 miles an hour with elapsed times of less than 6 seconds. Drag racing from the NHRA. The nitro-burning funny car, motorsport's most awesome display of horsepower. Hello, everybody. I'm Dave McClellan, and this huge crowd has come to Indianapolis Raceway Park for the 5th annual running of the Big Bud Shootout. The beauty of today's modern funny car is more than skin deep. Underneath the fiberglass shell beats the heart of an unpredictable machine. Its straight-line performance belies the complexity of its operation. There's much more involved than one might suspect. Right, Steve Evans?
David, no question about it. The funny cars are lean, mean, beautiful machines going down that quarter-mile drag strip. But what you can't see is what the driver is going through inside the cockpit. With the body off of Tom McEwen's car, hopefully we can illustrate a little of that for you. Now, with the body up, as the crew is starting the car, Tom is holding on the brake to keep it from lurching forward. As the engine starts to run on that gasoline prime, he will open this fuel shutoff valve, allowing the nitromethane to flow to the engine. Now, once the body is latched down, he'll slowly release the brake and start just kind of idling forward. This is a centrifugal clutch. It'll kind of move on its own to the water area where he's about to do the burnout. At that point, he'll grab this shift lever, and he'll pull the transmission into high gear so he does not over-rev the engine on the burnout. And with very precise throttle control, he'll do the burnout, grab the brake handle, bring the car to a stop without bouncing it. Then he'll reach over, take this lever, and lean out the engine. So as he's backing up, it will build heat. He wants about 140 degree of temperature when he goes to the starting line. Now, he'll also come back here, put the transmission back into low gear, so he doesn't forget to do that. Plenty of guys have. This is a reverse lever. It's a separate little transmission. Now he's backing up. When he gets back, he'll put this into a forward gear, do a few of those dry hops as he pre-stages. Now he'll take this lever and put it back into the rich position so that the car has plenty of fuel to leave the starting line. Now he's holding the brake tight. When the light goes green, he stomps on the pedal and starts to steer the car. He may have to grab the brake a little bit if it's smoke in the tires to slow the wheel speed. A few hundred feet out, he'll push this button. That will lean out the engine to create plenty of power in the mid-range. But before he gets to the finish line, he's got to release this button so it does not burn up in the lights. As he crosses the finish line, he's going to reach up here on the body, pull the parachute, shut off the fuel, and start braking the car. Now, if he's got a problem, if he's on fire, he'll pull this lever, operating the fire bottle on the engine, and he'll push this lever to operate the fire bottle that is inside the car. So all in all, these guys are busy men. In just 5 seconds, all this happened.
The pairings today are the result of a season-long points competition, and Billy Meyer, the number 4 qualifier, races Tim Gross, who qualified number 8. Ed McCulloch ended in the number 7 spot to go against the number 3 qualifier, Mark Oswald. John Force qualified number 2. He'll be racing against Tom McEwen, who won this race in 1984, and the defending champion and number 1 qualifier, Kenny Bernstein, goes against Johnny West. I'm sure all you drag racing fans think this is Kenny Bernstein, but you're wrong. This is Billy Meyer from Waco, Texas. And the reason his car today looks like Kenny Bernstein is the result of this explosion in time trials for the Big Bud Shootout. The car literally destroying itself, pieces of the fiberglass body flying all over the racetrack as the engine exploded when Meyer crossed the finish line. Billy did a tremendous job in keeping this car under control as he gradually brought it to a safe stop. Fortunately, Meyer uninjured in the explosion.
Billy, all the King's horses and all the King's men couldn't have put that body together again that you blew off here getting ready for the Big Bud Shootout.
No, there wasn't enough super glue in the world, I don't think. It definitely, did major damage and stuff, and if we had gotten a different car, we would have had to requalify. However, with the rules, just by keeping the same car and changing bodies, we stayed qualified after that run. That's with, Kenny Bernstein's help, that's what we elected to do.
Meyer, with the same car but a different body, now faces Tim Gross in his Corvette-bodied car in this, the first round of the Big Bud Shootout. $30,000 cash up for grabs to the winner of this very special 8-car field. It is Meyer in the near lane, Gross in the far lane. Both cars are now staged and ready, and it is Meyer off the starting line first. Meyer continues to extend his lead. A bit of smoke and an engine explosion for Tim Gross. The parts of the engine and body flying off the car. Gross fighting for control. It heads to the guardrail, but he brings it to a safe stop, parking it on the grass right next to the racetrack. The car continuing to smoke. That's Tim Gross coming out of the escape hatch and rolling off the top of the car. There's Billy Meyer over to check on Gross to see about his condition. Gross suffering one of the major engine explosions of his career. As he approached the finish line, the car literally exploded into a ball of flame, and in the center of that fireball is Tim Gross. Earlier, Steve showed us how complicated it is to drive one of these cars. Consider Tim Gross. He's already performed some 8 separate maneuvers to this point. Then the engine explodes. Now he's got to worry about hitting the fire bottles, but most importantly, keeping the car under control, driving it in his own lane to a safe and upright stop. All of this with a fire coming up directly in his face.
It looked like you tried to get it stopped just as quickly as you could to get out of it.
Yeah, I did. Obviously, the fire came right in on my face, so I was doing what I could do to get the fire bottles to activate and all. And but when the window's going out and the fire's coming in your face, it's really hard to contain that fire up front. I don't know if the tank exploded yet or not. I didn't even look at it yet.
Sorry to see you have all these problems.
Well, thank you, Stephen. That's part of the game, right?
Tim Gross out of competition but uninjured, protected by the NHRA safety rules that have once again done their job. The Big Bud Shootout is being brought to you by Budweiser. That clean, crisp taste that says Budweiser. Race fans, this Bud's for you. More first round action of the Big Bud Shootout after this. Lots of work going on in Billy Meyer's pit area as they prepare the car for the semifinal round of the Big Bud Shootout. The Meyer crew, under the direction of Mike Guger and Mark Stewart, doing all the necessary between rounds maintenance on that 3,000 horsepower engine. We're at Indianapolis Raceway Park for the Big Bud Shootout. This is round number 1 action, and this is Ed McCulloch. He has the distinction of racing against Mark Oswald at the wheel of the Candies and Hughes Pontiac. Oswald, the 1984 NHRA World Champion from Cleves, Ohio, drives the car that is based out of Houma, Louisiana. For McCulloch, home is Hemet, California, and he drives the Oldsmobile Forenza out of the racing team owned by Larry Minor. These cars are here as a result of their qualifying performances throughout the entire season at NHRA national events. McCulloch is lined up in the far lane of the racetrack. In the near lane is Mark Oswald. Both cars are ready. McCulloch responds first. He's off the starting line ahead of Mark Oswald. But look at the horsepower of the Candies and Hughes car. Just thunders past in the finish line to a 5.73-second elapsed time at 258 miles an hour. Back at the starting line, our next pair getting ready. This is the car driven by John Force, a Chevrolet Cavalier. And here is the winner of the Big Bud Shootout back in 1984, Tom McEwen. After nearly 30 years behind the wheel of drag racing vehicles, McEwen enjoying his best season ever. He's already won 2 races this year. The Cajun Nationals down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and the North Star Nationals up at Brainerd, Minnesota. For John Force, he has yet to win a national event, but his qualifying efforts this season put him in a very commanding position here in the Big Bud Shootout. For Tom McEwen, his highest qualifying positions came in the 2 races he has won this season. The burnouts are completed. Both drivers now concentrating on the procedures necessary to get a good start. Following the directions of their crewmen, they pull up close to the starting line. Then they inch forward into the staging beams that go across the racetrack. They are light beams. When they are in the proper position, the 2 lights on the top of the Christmas tree indicate to starter Buster Couch. Anytime now, you can throw the switch. And it's a green light start for both drivers. A little bit of smoke, but a close race. At the finish line, John Force by a matter of inches. John Force defeats Tom McEwen, and what a great race it was. 5.86 seconds. His speed, 252 miles an hour. Let's take a look at this one again. It is McEwen in the far lane, John Force in the near lane. They leave the starting line with McEwen getting an ever so slight advantage. But John Force puts together a great run in the middle of the racetrack. He begins to pull ahead of Tom McEwen, and as he just inches by, they near the finish line, and there you see it. By about a wheel length, John Force defeats Tom McEwen.
Well, Dave, as you saw, that race was so close. John Force, you didn't know for sure if you'd won it.
I didn't know, but I was upset from the start line. I got that old look through the window, drive it off again. I'm telling Cole, what are we doing now? But he seemed to know, and it worked. And I made a move on McEwen, and he came back around me again, and I'm thinking, wow. Next thing I know, I'm in the lights, and I'm looking for someone to cheer. What's wrong with these people down here? They got to let me know who's winning these races.
Well, here I am to do just that. Austin said what to you, or showed you what sign?
He looked through the window, and he said, she ain't holding on the starting line. Drive her off again. We know she'll muscle and run 67 like she did the other day. And
how does he tell you that? You can't hear him.
Oh, he gives me a little bit of this, a little of that, and throws in pizzazz like he always does and confuses me. But this weekend we got serious. He told me what he wanted and drove it off, and thank God it worked.
Go get him.
Thank you.
John Force talking about his crew chief, Austin Coyle, as if he were a baseball coach in the third base box, giving signals to his batter. Our next pair getting ready to go. The defending champion, the #1 qualifier, is in the near lane. That's Kenny Bernstein. He is racing against Johnny West. West out of Chandler, Arizona, the latest in a long series of drivers for his car owner and crew chief, Roland Leong. West, in his first full season of NHRA national event competition, qualified very well for the Big Bud Shootout, but he'll need all the performance he can find here today as he is racing the hottest driver on the circuit, Kenny Bernstein. In time trials yesterday, Bernstein ran the fastest time ever by a funny car at over 271 miles an hour. Bernstein is the reigning world champion and had an incredible season a year ago when he won 6 NHRA national events, a new record, plus this race, the Big Bud Shootout. Thus far this season, he has won 2 races, the Grand Nationals in Canada and the Summer Nationals in Englishtown, New Jersey. He's the odds-on favorite to repeat as the world champion of funny cars. lights go green, and Bernstein goes up in smoke. He moves first, but the car's smoking violently, and Johnny West, in the upset of the Big Bud Shootout, moves into the semifinals. What a disappointment it has to be for the defending champion. Kenny Bernstein moved first. The tires instantly lost traction. Huge clouds of smoke billowed up out of the rear of the car. As we see in slow motion replay, Bernstein had the advantage off the starting line, but it went away instantly, and Johnny West headed to the finish line and took the big win.
Now some confidence for the semifinal.
Well, you know, we always have a tough round. Nobody's easy around here, so, you know, as Bernstein knows, you know, nobody's a for sure win, so we'll just press right on.
Thank you, man.
Johnny West with a bright smile on his face, obviously showing the elation of the moment as he took the upset win over the #1 qualifier. That sets up our semifinal pairing. John Force against Billy Meyer. Meyer has lane choice by virtue of the lower elapsed time of the first round. And Johnny West may have gone from the frying pan right into the fire. He races Mark Oswald, who had a 5.73-second elapsed time, the quickest of the first round of elimination. And this is the legendary Austin Coyle, preparing a piston for the semifinal round of John Force's car at the Big Bud Shootout. At the Big Bud Shootout, I'm Dave McClelland, along with Steve Evans, and a huge crowd is jammed into Indianapolis Raceway Park to watch the 8 best funny cars in the world do battle. We're down to 4 cars, the semifinal round. John Force against Billy Meyer. Meyer in the far lane of the racetrack, not using the normal Mustang body. He destroyed that in that time trial explosion. Perhaps the most interested spectator amongst this huge crowd is at the far end of the racetrack with Steve Evans.
Dave, joining me down here at the far end is 4-time funny car world champion Don Prudhomme. And Don, the semifinals of the Big Bud Shootout are coming up. Your impressions, predictions, if you will. First, let's take John Force versus Billy Meyer.
Well, Force, you know, it just ran very good to run before, and racing Myers got a little bit of advantage. So I look to see Myers have the advantage on the run.
You know, Myers had that terrible fire and explosion. Sometimes it's hard to get back on track after something like that.
It is, but I was surprised he come out so well in the first round of the Bud Shootout with the 75, and to come back, I think he's got a lot of momentum going right now.
So Mark Oswald and his opponent Johnny West.
Mark Oswald's my pick. He's strong. Mark's, you know, he's been running good all year, and he's running very quick the first round. I look to see him go all the way.
All right, let's go back to Dave McClelland and the semifinals of the Big Bud Shootout.
And Steve, as you know, Don Prudhomme will be back in competition in 1987, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him right here in the midst of the Big Bud Shootout because he always races hard and qualifies very well. But the spotlight right now is on these 2 cars. This is Billy Meyer racing against John Force, and there's Austin Coyle. Watch close. Maybe you can pick up some of the tips that John Force gets from his crew chief by virtue of hand signals. That one obviously indicates, let's stop. And now he says, roll it forward again. But now Austin Coyle goes through this procedure, relaying to John Force what he thinks the driver should do to get the car off the starting line. There was the signal, the wave from John Force. He acknowledged it. Now we'll see if he understood it, because as we heard him say, sometimes he's just a bit confused by all those hand signals from Austin Coyle. Oh, what a great start by Billy Meyer. He has a problem or two, and look at the tire smoke for John Force. But Force wins the race by a car length, as Billy Meyer had problems after that great start. The elapsed time for Force, a 5.83-second elapsed time. Remember, though, he was smoking the tires in the middle of the course. Here we see it happen again. Meyer, look at him leave. He put a whole shot on John Force that was almost like a train link. The crew acknowledging Meyer is out in front, then he has to lift. The car going into tire shake and smoking the tires, as is John Force. But Force recovered, regained the traction, got back on the throttle, and by a car length or 2, won the race over Billy Meyer.
Well, for the second time today, John Force has had to come from behind, and the way the tires started to haze, I really wondered if you were going to be able to do that.
It wasn't a little drive off that time. It was a whole bunch of drive off.
I mean, easy.
Yeah, there was no half throttle. What to do? She was shaking, and she moved out, and I'm looking at Coyle like, what's he going to do? And I knew he had me. He was out of car, and I was wanting to put her on the wood, and every time I do this, I choke it, and I left it at half throttle, and we outguessed him, we outlucked him, beat Bernstein twice, beat Myers. Who was that?
Kind of looks like Bernstein.
I know that. Yeah, it's just the brakes for me. Had he fell, it's going to hurt us. So what kind of ET we run?
583.
83? Amazes me what they'll do at half-track, these little plastic funny cars, huh?
See you in the final round.
John Force, a man that obviously takes a great deal of pleasure at his profession. He's into the finals of the Big Bud Shootout. He'll race one of these two cars. Will it be Johnny West or will it be Mark Oswald? A dramatic side-by-side burnout to heat up those huge slicks to try to provide as much traction as possible for the some 3,000 horsepower that are generated by these racing engines that use nitromethane for fuel. For Mark Oswald, he has been the class of the field thus far. He has low elapsed time with that Candies and Hughes Pontiac. But don't forget, Johnny West is in an upset mood. He just put away the #1 qualifier and defending champion Kenny Bernstein in the first round. Driving the Dodge Daytona car. That's Roland Leong raising the body. A crewman going under doing something at the front of the engine. Nobody has got any kind of frantic moves. It appears that it may have been planned. But it's very unusual to see them raise the body on these cars once the engines have started and the driver begins this burnout procedure. Oswald calmly waiting, and now Johnny West pulls up to the starting line. The car owner, Paul Candies, directing traffic for Oswald. Roland Leong doing the same for Johnny West. Whatever it was that they raised body for, it obviously is presenting no problem as West is into the staging beams, and so is Oswald. And West goes up in smoke. Oswald streaking towards the finish line. West shuts it off, but Oswald into the finals to race against John Force. Look at the elapsed time. 5.68 seconds to cover 1,320 feet from a standing start. We watch again and see Johnny West in the far lane just instantly go up in smoke. The moment he hit the throttle, the huge slicks losing traction, billowing smoke. From then on, it was Mark Oswald all the way.
With the quickest run of the Big Bud eliminations, a 5.68 Mark Oswald, you go into the final. But, you know, I think lane choice might have been a good factor for you. He smoked the tires very hard in that other lane.
Did he? Ours was really close. The car, John Force's car, I noticed on his run, pulled to the right real hard, and ours did the same thing, and I was just lucky enough to recover.
Can you go to the starting line in the final with this kind of horsepower? Would you maybe back it down a little bit? Force only ran a 5.83.
Yeah, but, you know, he ran a 66 in qualifying. He could step up at any time. That run's going to be at 5 o'clock. It'll be a little cooler. The racetrack may be a little better. I'm sure we'll try to soften it up just a little bit, though.
Good job.
Thank you.
When we come back, $30,000 will be on the line on one single race between Mark Oswald and John Force as these two face each other down in the finals of the Big Bud Shootout. The finals of the Big Bud Shootout. Mark Oswald at the wheel of the Candies and Hughes Pontiac against the Chevrolet of John Force. $30,000 up for grabs in this single run over a quarter-mile distance. Recognizing the fact that these drivers have been competing for an entire season to earn the right to race in the Big Bud Shootout, in this final run, the winner will be compensated at a rate of more than $5,200 a second or $22 a foot for the quarter-mile run. Consider that the next time you go in and ask your boss for a raise. Of course, the money has got to increase the pressure on Mark Oswald and John Force, and Force has the whole shot, but Force crosses the center line and Oswald wins the race. Oswald wins. Force disqualified after a great starting line maneuver when he pulled ahead of Mark Oswald. Mark ran a 5.72 second elapsed time, but it really wasn't important. What happened was Mark Oswald was late off the starting line. John Force had the advantage, but smoked the tires, lost control, went across the center line, and was disqualified. At that point, Mark Oswald, the Big Bud Shootout champion, $30,000 richer.
Knowing this young man as I do, I would say more than the $30,000 is the satisfaction he gets today from defeating 7 of the best funny cars in all the world. And what a valiant opponent he had in the final round, John Force. Mark, you did it. Congratulations.
Thank you. We're really happy for old Milwaukee. Pontiac Motorsports, you know, we're just tickled to death, and Budweiser for putting on an event like this to where we can race for this kind of money. You know, it was a great battle in qualifying for it all year. You know, John Force was right there. In fact, he qualified ahead of me. It was just anybody's race.
He was off the mark first.
Was he? Yeah, it was a good race. I think he came right over the center line. I know he must have had traction problems. Our car was a little bit loose.
But indeed, it's a fine day for Paul Candies, Leonard Hughes, and Mark Oswald. The world title, and now this. Quite a career.
Yeah, everybody on the crew's just been, working as hard as they can, and we'll be back again tomorrow for the same thing.
In spite of all that money, Oswald ready again for another day of racing. The Big Bud Shootout has been brought to you by Budweiser, that clean, crisp taste that says Budweiser. Race fans, this Bud's for you. This has been a presentation of Diamond B Sports.